Ridiculous deaths. Alexander I of Yugoslavia refused to make a public appearance on a Tuesday after 3 of his family members died on a Tuesday. After finally being forced to appear on a Tuesday, he was promptly assassinated. In 2010, an MI6 agent was found naked and dead inside of a padlocked bag in his London home. Police concluded that he accidentally locked himself in the bag and died as a result. In 2001, a man was shot dead while testing out a bulletproof potion that he received from a witch doctor. After applying the potion for 2 weeks, he asked a fellow villager to shoot him so that he could test it out. Turns out the potion was just cherry Kool-Aid and the man died instantly. Morbid facts that you didn't know about the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Godzilla was originally created to symbolize the atomic bombings and a victim of them. He's covered in keloid scars to depict the brutal body scars of survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Survivors who suffered the most from the bombings were in such horrific condition that people called them ant-walking alligators. They were described to be faceless with their heads transformed into blackened alligator hides with red holes indicating mouths. Just months after the bombings, Kix cereal offered an atomic bomb-shaped ring in exchange for a box top and 15 cents. While the atomic bombings were devastating, the most destructive bombing raid in world history actually took place a few months earlier. The US Army used incendiary bombs to light a giant flaming X over the center of Tokyo. It left at least 100,000 civilians dead and 1 million more homeless. Creepy ask Reddit. People that do autopsies. What's the weirdest thing that you have found that didn't have anything to do with the person's death? Pennies. Hundreds of pennies, nearly $6 worth inside the skin all over the arms and legs. Deceased was a hermit, lived alone, ordered out for every meal. Apparently he'd been surgically implanting pennies in his skin for years. No effing clue why. Once spoke with a pathologist at a conference. During her training, they were doing an autopsy on a body that was found by the river. They did a CAT scan and something looked funny about his gut. When they opened him up, his stomach moved. It was a snake that had burrowed inside his body. It even struck and bit one of the techs before they realized what was going on. These are some morbid facts that you didn't know about the Lincoln assassination. Lincoln's bodyguard was an alcoholic who had previously gotten in trouble for drinking on the job. He wasn't at his post to protect Lincoln that night because he was next door drinking at the Star Saloon. The same saloon where John Wilkes Booth was drinking to build up the courage to assassinate the president. The chair that Lincoln was shot in still has his bloodstains on it. John Wilkes Booth also planned on assassinating Ulysses S. Grant along with Lincoln. But he didn't attend the play because his wife was on bad terms with Lincoln's wife at the time. Instead, the other man in Lincoln's balcony was military officer Henry Rathbone. After the assassination, he was overwhelmed with guilt for the rest of his life for not preventing it. He slowly went mad and eventually stabbed his wife to death before he was committed to a mental asylum for the rest of his life. Creepy ask Reddits. What's the creepiest thing that happened to you personally that made you question reality? I was living in Boston. I woke up at 3 a.m. or so to my cat jumping onto my bed and curling in between my calf muscles and going to sleep. My cat would do this every night since I was 5 years old. That was his spot. It was something I was very familiar with. Thing is, my cat was living with my parents on the West Coast, so I couldn't understand what the hell I just felt. But I knew it was my cat. I just figured I was dreaming. Got a call from my parents the following morning that my cat had died around midnight the previous night. That was 3 hours behind since I was on the East Coast. Guess that was my cat traveling to Boston to come see me one last time. Creepy ask Reddits. Redditors with significant others who talk in their sleep. What is the creepiest thing they've said? I talk in my sleep regularly, but one instance comes to mind. My significant other said she was going to the bathroom in the middle of the night. On her way back, I said, "It's following you," and went back to sleep. My wife doesn't talk in her sleep, but I did once wake up to her standing over me and staring at me Paranormal Activity style. It was terrifying, and she has no recollection of it. She said, "Too many Asians here." I'm Asian. I crawled into bed when she was asleep. She reached over and grabbed my arm. She snuggled my arm a bit, and I thought it was sweet. Until, with a thick Russian accent, she says, "I break you," and acted like she was snapping my arm. Soft, creepy laughter, then immediately propping up at a 90-degree angle saying, "It's all part of the show," then going back to sleep. Weird history facts. The ancient Romans didn't have toothpaste or toothbrushes, but they had perfect teeth because their diets were so low in sugar. The Guinness Book of World Records recognizes the 1927 presidential election of Liberia as the most fraudulent in history. Although there were only 15,000 registered voters in Liberia at the time, Charles D.B. King received 234,000 and won the election. Incest was encouraged in ancient Egypt, as with many aristocracies, to keep the bloodline pure. Moreover, if they were twins and one was a boy and one was a girl, they were married at birth because it was assumed that they must have banged in the womb. Creepy ass credits. What is the creepiest or most unexplained thing that's happened to you that you still think about to this day? I had a recurring nightmare of a pitch black parasite sucking the life out of me. Sometimes it would wait in dark corners for me to go to bed, and my cats always slept on my bed when it happened. It was a very stressful time for me, and I soon got an itch in the area of my chest where I dreamed the parasite was sucking the life out of me. I eventually got sick and felt a pea-sized lump in the same spot, so I went to my doc and they ordered a biopsy. As it turned out, I had male breast cancer at the age of 28. After I got well again, the dream never came back, and my cats slept in their usual places again instead of on my bed. The dream was creepy enough, but what made it for me was my cats protecting me. What's the scariest story you've heard or told? I met a guy who was once hitchhiking around Australia with some friends. One of the guys said they were near his distant uncle's house whom he'd never met before. He got a phone number from a family member and the uncle offered them a place to stay. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to go to bed, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of backpacks and sleeping bags. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed a kit. They stayed a couple days and nothing out of the ordinary happened. Afterwards, the uncle drove them to the bus station and they continued on their way. About a year later, that man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man who was picking up young hitchhikers and slaughtering them. The guy who told me this story was 100% certain that he slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims. Creepy ass Reddits. What's the fastest you've seen a crowd go from excited to horrified? The entire assembly of students at the elementary school where astronaut/teacher Krista McAuliffe taught at. They watched the Space Shuttle Challenger explode seconds after takeoff, killing everyone on board including their teacher. WWE's Over the Edge in 1999. Owen Hart fell 70 feet to his death during the event, and the company inexplicably continued the show after he'd been taken to the hospital. The Station nightclub fire in Rhode Island 2003. The band Great White had just gotten on stage and the crowd was jamming out. Within 2 minutes, the whole place was up in flames due to faulty pyrotechnics, and everyone was screaming in agony. 100 people died, including the guitarist of the band, Ty Longley. Creepy ass Reddits. Forensic investigators of Reddit, what are some of the most disturbing and horrific cases you've worked on? I do fire investigation, and one that stuck with me was a girl started speaking to God at the dinner table. And then that night, she lit her room on fire with herself in it. She was likely mentally disturbed. I think about that one a lot. Gotta be the guy who stabbed his newborn and 4-year-old before slitting his throat and jabbing the knife into his chest. The worst part was his phone on the bed with numerous texts from his fiancée begging him not to harm the children. Had a paranoid schizophrenic who forced his elderly mother to eat rocks, and I mean a shitload of rocks, to the point where she died. He told police that he was feeding her rocks to weigh her down so that God couldn't take her yet. Weird nature facts. There's an area in Venezuela where lightning strikes 280 times per hour, 160 nights per year. It's called Relámpago del Catatumbo, aka the Everlasting Storm. The Indo-Hyas was a deer-like land mammal that was about the size of a raccoon. It's also the earliest known ancestor of the whale. This is how koalas are weighed, and it might just be the most adorable thing ever. While grizzly bears are large and terrifying, their size doesn't even compare to a polar bear's. When the sun is directly overhead, the landscape looks like a bad rendering of a video game. It's known as the subsolar point. A woman from Australia was awarded by PETA after rehabilitating a huntsman spider that only had 2 of its legs left. She fed it water and small cockroaches for a month until it grew all of its legs back. Morbid Facts That You Didn't Know About the Holocaust, Part 3. During World War II, Pope Pius XII told the United States that he couldn't confirm reports that Germany was executing Jews. But in 2020, newly unsealed documents revealed that he was lying and knew all along that the Holocaust was happening. Homosexual males were identified in concentration camps by downward-facing pink triangles. Because of this identification, many of them were still considered criminals after their camps were freed. As a result, many of them were sent back to prison to serve out their terms. In the 1980s, a Holocaust denial group offered $50,000 to anyone who could prove that gas chambers were used at Auschwitz. They were forced by judge to pay that and an additional $40,000 to Auschwitz survivor Mel Mermelstein, who provided the proof. Morbid Facts, Part 518. When Jimi Hendrix was 16, his mother died from a ruptured spleen at the young age of 33. But Jimmy's father didn't allow him or his brother to attend the funeral. Instead, he gave them shots of whiskey and told them that this was how men should deal with a loss. After several hours of drinking on board a ferry, Englishwoman Emma Blackwell fell to her death. She'd apparently been imitating Kate Winslet's pose from the Titanic movie and lost her footing before plummeting from the ship. Smile mask syndrome is a psychological condition characterized by prolonged unnatural smiling. It can lead to painful strain of the facial muscles and result in an inability to stop smiling even when agitated or upset. In 1993, Missouri man James Scott damaged a levee on the Mississippi River simply to delay his wife from coming home so that he could party. Instead, the river ended up flooding over 14,000 acres, and the 23-year-old man was sentenced to life in prison for intentionally causing a catastrophe. Morbid Facts, Part 520. This 1968 photo shows South Vietnamese women and children just moments before they were killed in the My Lai massacre. Witnesses later stated that American troops tried tearing the blouse off the woman in back as her mother attempted to protect her. Grape had become such a big issue across Africa that a South African medical technician invented Grape-X in 2005. It's a device with sharp teeth that gets inserted into a woman's private area. Any man who attempts to grape her will impale himself on the teeth and must go to the hospital to have the device removed. In Guatemala 2017, hundreds of teenage girls tried to protest and escape from an orphanage due to continuous grape and abuse. As punishment, 51 of them were locked in a small classroom without any food, water, or toilets. The next day, a fire was started inside the room, reportedly by several girls as an act of protest. But the staff still refused to open the door and simply watched them all burn from the outside. 41 girls ended up perishing in this awful tragedy. Morbid Facts, Part 521. 18-year-old student John Savage was spared during the Columbine massacre in 1999. He was hiding underneath a table in the library as Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were going around shooting random students. At one point, Harris aimed his gun at Savage and told him to identify himself. A friend of Klebold's, John, showed his face and asked Klebold what he was doing. The shooter responded, "Oh, just killing people." Savage then asked if they were gonna kill him, to which Klebold responded no and told John to run out of the building, which he did. Cello player Mike Edwards was an original founding member of the band Electric Light Orchestra. Tragically, he died in 2010 when a massive hay bale rolled down a hillside and collided with his van. In 2008, a man from California injected cocaine into his arm and apparently thought he accidentally injected some air into his vein. So he quickly ran into a Denny's restaurant and attempted to amputate his own arm using a butter knife. Police eventually subdued the man with a taser and rushed him to the hospital as Denny's closed for the night. Morbid Facts, Part 522. In 1997, the Cat in the Hat Thanksgiving Day Parade float careened out of control due to high winds, knocking a lamppost into the head of Kathleen Carana, putting her in a month-long coma. She sued Macy's in the city for $395 million and ended up settling for an undisclosed amount in 2001. Kathleen eventually purchased a nice New York City apartment with the settlement money, but just 5 years later, Yankees pitcher Corey Lytle crashed his plane into her building and the engine ended up in her bedroom. Luckily, the crash happened just minutes before Kathleen was due to arrive home, but Lytle and his flight instructor were both killed while 21 others in the building were injured. Adding to the weirdness of this story, the flight instructor's friend was also supposed to be on this flight but got stuck in traffic and told them to leave without him. So he managed to escape death until just 1 month later when he was killed in a separate plane crash. Morbid Facts, Part 523. In 1899, brothers George and Willie Muse were kidnapped from their farm in Virginia by a freak hunter when they were just little boys. Born with albinism, they were forced to perform in circuses for the next 25 years under the names the Sheep-Headed Cannibals and Ambassadors from Mars. They were often ordered to partake in disturbing acts such as biting the heads off of snakes or consuming raw meat in front of crowds. The brothers essentially worked as modern-day slaves until their mother found them working for the Ringling Brothers and successfully sued for their release. In 2002, German actor Gunther Kaufmann confessed to falling on his accountant during a fight and accidentally suffocating the man to death with his 260-pound body. The actor was subsequently sentenced to 15 years in prison as a result of the incident. But 3 years later, it was revealed that Kaufmann was innocent and had only confessed to protect his dying wife who had actually murdered the accountant. After a night of drinking in 2010, Michigan man Jeffrey Duthette was sleeping in his bed when his dog Kiko suddenly bit off his toe. When he went to the hospital, it turned out the toe had a bad infection that likely would have spread and killed Jerry if left untreated. Thus, the dog had saved his owner's life. There's an insane reason why the United States never switched over to the metric system. In 1793, Thomas Jefferson wrote to his friends in France requesting help with adopting a new system of measurement. The French responded by sending a scientist named Joseph Dombey to deliver the standards of measurement for the metric system. However, the ship Dombey was traveling on was eventually knocked off course by a storm and ended up deep in pirate territory. The scientist was soon kidnapped by pirates and imprisoned on the Caribbean island of Montserrat. Unfortunately, Dombey died before they were able to ransom him, so the units of measurement never made it to Jefferson. And that's why America went with yards instead. We're gonna cut that last part out. Morbid Facts, Part 524. In October of 2011, famed narrator David Attenborough found a skull in the garden of his London property. He immediately informed police, who later determined the skull belonged to the victim of a gruesome murder during the Victorian era. Julia Martha Thomas was killed by her housemaid in 1879 before being chopped up, boiled, and fed to local children. There's a room in the basement of Oregon State Hospital known today as the Room of Forgotten Souls. In 2004, hundreds of copper cans were discovered holding the remains of 3,600 mental patients who were cremated on site starting in 1917. Built in 1628, the Swedish warship Vasa was hailed as the greatest warship ever built, but infamously sank just 20 minutes into its maiden voyage, resulting in the deaths of at least 30 people. After it was salvaged in 1961, archaeologists found that the ship was horribly asymmetrical. Apparently, some of the builders had measured in Swedish feet, which was 12 inches, while others had measured in Amsterdam feet, which was 11 inches. The ship was knocked over by a mild gust of wind less than a mile into its voyage. Morbid Facts, Part 525. In 2010, Dr. Jacqueline Koterick tried breaking into her ex-boyfriend's home by climbing down his chimney. 3 days later, a house sitter discovered her decomposing body inside after she apparently died from mechanical asphyxia. In 2008, a woman from China cut off her husband's beaver cleaver with scissors while he was sleeping, after he reportedly brought another woman home and requested a threesome. While the man was recovering from the surgery that reattached it, his wife cut it off again and threw it out the window. In 1989, Montana woman Patricia Meehan was driving on the wrong side of the highway and eventually crashed into another car. She emerged from her vehicle with a confused look on her face before climbing over a fence and staring back at the wreckage. Patricia stood there for a few moments before wandering into the open field behind her and disappearing into the night. Despite hundreds of reported sightings of her in the months that followed, she hasn't been located to this day. Some investigators suspect Patricia suffered from amnesia as a result of head trauma, but the case remains unsolved. Morbid Facts, Part 526. In 1986, Andres Martinez lost control of his tanker truck and crashed into a mountain pass in Spain. He and his wife died on impact, but their 10-year-old son Juan Pedro was nowhere to be seen. No sign or remains of him have ever been found to this day, as Interpol has called it the strangest missing person case in Europe. The founder of North Face, Douglas Tompkins, died from hypothermia after a kayaking accident in 2015. He'd been traveling with longtime friend and Patagonia founder Yvon Chouinard in the mountains of Patagonia. In 1964, actor Peter Sellers inhaled some poppers before getting in bed with his wife. He was apparently trying to achieve the ultimate gasm, but instead suffered 8 heart attacks over a 3-hour span. In 1999, tobacco manufacturer Philip Morris tried convincing the government of the Czech Republic that smoking was highly beneficial to the country. They argued that more people would die earlier as a result of smoking, thus helping the government save millions on pensions, hospitals, and housing for the elderly.